We are continuing our phenomenal series of meeting Jesus along the way in different places and spaces. And up until now, we have looked at Jesus in the Gospels. But today, we are going to venture out of the Gospels into the book of Acts. Now, the book of Acts is oftentimes considered part 2 of one of the Gospels. It is thought that the Gospel writer who wrote Luke also wrote the book of Acts. A couple reasons why: because there's a similarity in the way that the story has been told. There is a kind of continuation of the vision of sort of the epic nature of God. And so that has passed down from tradition that the writer of Luke is also the writer of the book of Acts. The book of Acts is very, very intriguing and interesting, I think, to us, because it tells the story of post-resurrection Christians. So that's you and me. We are post-resurrection, post-ascension Christians. After Jesus was raised from the dead, after Jesus ascended into heaven, what happened? And so it tells the story of the very first Christians, how they handled it, what they did, and what occurred to them. So we are going to look at a story in the book of Acts that's farther in, and let me tell you what has happened up until now. Up until now, you had the resurrection of Jesus, and he was around for 40 days. And then on the 40th day, he ascended into heaven, and those disciples watched him. They watched him go up. And there's some great art where you can see these disciples who are on the ground looking straight up, and they're looking at a cloud and just this little pair of feet. He goes up into the sky, and it's the weirdest thing in the world. And basically the disciples are sort of bewildered, and they're like, what do we do now? And they ask that question for 10 days, because nothing happens. Then on the 50th day, the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, they're all huddled in this room up above, and all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit descends like tongues of fire. And they start speaking and extolling and praising God. And the Pentecost, the day of the Holy Spirit coming, the birth of the Church of Jesus Christ, happens on that day. Now they're overwhelmed by what has happened, and they go out of that room, thanks be to God, and they end up there in the city hall, the city space of Jerusalem, and Peter gets up and he starts telling people what's going on, and he does the first Christian sermon. If you read it, it's kind of boring, but it works, because after his proclamation of Jesus being raised from the dead by God for the sake of all of us, 5,000 people are baptized that day. And so begins the Christian church. It all seems to be going pretty well in Jerusalem. They're all there, they're praising God. There's a story in the book of Acts chapter 2 of how they all lived with one another, breaking bread and sharing the table. And no one had any need, because as anyone had need, the other one gave. It's a beautiful vision of the church, a beatific community together. But we all know that things that are beautiful don't always last, right? And pretty soon, the church becomes a threat to the Jewish powers. And there they begin to not just question what the Christians are doing, those who are following Jesus, but they begin to consider them a threat. They are a threat not just to the Jewish vision of what is holy and right and true. They are also considered a threat to the Roman Empire. And so in Acts chapter 6, I believe, chapter 5, we have the first martyr of the Christian church, Stephen, is stoned. He's stoned to death for proclaiming that he belongs to Jesus Christ, just like you. That's all he did. So at the time that he's stoned to death, there is a line in the book of Acts. Oh, it's in chapter 8 that he's stoned. And that's the first part we're going to read. So I want you to meet Saul. Acts 8. And Saul approved of their killing him. That day, a severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him, but Saul was ravaging the church by entering house after house, dragging off both men and women. He committed them to prison. It's as ghoulish as you can imagine it to be. The persecution against Christians has begun. By the way, we were told when Jesus, before he ascended, he said that he was going to send out all of his disciples to Judea and Samaria and to all the ends of the earth. Well, because of this persecution that happened in Jerusalem, it is the reason that Christians began to run away. They would flee Jerusalem and start going to all the ends of the earth. And in that process, they actually proclaimed the gospel along the way. So we have now met Saul. Saul is one of the people who actually approved of the stoning of Stephen, and he is actually a Pharisee, very good Pharisee, very, very holy Pharisee, good at what he does, and we should all be proud of him because he obeys the law. And he has found it as one of his callings to make sure about the purity of Judaism. And so he's taken on that mantle. So now we're going to go ahead and, yes.
What was his authority that let him do that?
So he was a Pharisee, and he met with the chief priests, and we're going to find out actually that he asked for letters to have authority to continue to persecute. So there was no other authority. I think he probably was like one of what we would have considered the elders of the church, and I'm guessing back then that when the elders of the church took on the mantle of making sure that the church was pure, that was authorized.
The definition of a Pharisee, what's the...
A Pharisee, so in Judaism, the Pharisaical sect of Judaism actually believed in the resurrection. So that's one of the things that separates the Pharisees from the Sadducees. The Sadducees did not believe in resurrection. But the Pharisees were known for the keepers of the law and the interpreters of the law. And so Paul himself will claim that he was zealous in keeping the law and really was above none in being able to keep the law. Okay? All right, let's read what Acts says about Saul. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. So here you can see he received those letters from the chief priest to have the authority to go and ravage Damascus, which is in Syria, and was going to do just that. And the word had actually gotten out that he was about to do that. And he's along the way, and he has people to accompany him, henchmen maybe. You know, you need some people who can rough it up with you. And he hears the voice and falls down to the ground. And the voice says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" His question to the voice, "Who are you, Lord?" The word Lord in Greek, as you well know, can be also translated as sir. You know, who are you, sir? Who are you? Weird voice from above, you know. I mean, so it's very possible that that was sort of what he was saying, and maybe not Lord, but he could have been saying Lord too. At any rate, there's absolute clarity that is provided from the voice. I am Jesus. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. Now the word persecuting here, as well as in verse 4, can be translated also as pursue or being chased. It appears in the Gospel of Matthew in the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when they persecute you and revile you because of my name. Rejoice and be glad, for your treasure is great in heaven. Yeah? So the idea of being pursued and chased and being persecuted is not new to Jesus. And I think he's now saying to Paul, you're making sure it's not new to those Christians either. And that I'm going to call you on that. And we're going to spend a little bit more time as we dig deeper as to why he used those words, why Jesus used those words specifically. So Paul is now blind. Yeah, he can't see. And so thank God for those friends who were there. It was a good call that he wasn't all by himself. So they lead him, and he goes to Damascus. And of course, he doesn't eat or drink. And what happens when he gets to Damascus? So this meeting Jesus session, you get two for the price of one, because Jesus meets two people along the way. Hear about Ananias, Acts 9:10. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, "Ananias." He answered, "Here I am, Lord." Of course, that could be Lord or it could be Sir. It also could be Master, by the way. The Lord said to him, "Get up and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas, look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. At this moment he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight." But Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who invoke your name." Right? That's that letter. The word has gotten around that letter has come out. But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before Gentiles and kings and before the people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." So Ananias went and entered the house. He laid his hands on Saul and said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on your way here, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and his sight was restored. And he got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. Okay. So let's engage in the interesting experiment that we've been doing over these past sessions, that in meeting Jesus, that there's 3 parts to it. First, that Jesus initiates the meeting. Let's see if that works. Second, that there's an invitation to deep change. And third, that there's boundaries that are crossed. Okay? Can somebody get Linda a copy? Thank you. Yeah, we have some extras over there. Looks so great.
Here's one.
Yeah, Amy, one more.
Right here.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so Jesus initiates the meeting. So what's interesting about the meeting with Saul, whoops, all right, okay, is that we have a risen and ascended Jesus. This is not a Jesus who's been walking on the earth. This is a Jesus who's already gone to heaven to sit at the right hand of God, so to speak. And so what's so amazing about Jesus initiating this meeting is that Jesus initiates this meeting, right? I mean, what that tells you and me as post-resurrection, post-ascension Christians is that Jesus is not afraid to initiate a meeting with us. I mean, I'm so astonished by how many people will read the Gospels and say, oh man, if only I was a disciple or an apostle back then and I actually saw Jesus walk on this earth. What would my life be like? What would my faith be like? Well, the news is for all of us, we are not exempt from any of this. Jesus can and will show up at any time. So this encounter is actually a little troubling. It means that we who are on this side can also have what happened to Saul happen to us, right? I mean, we may be just going on our way, going about our business, maybe doing something we shouldn't be doing, and all of a sudden, so this meeting is pretty astonishing. And what's pretty amazing to me is that there's not just one meeting, but 2 meetings. Ananias heard the voice too. Ananias spoke. There was interaction, interchange between the voices. So Jesus ascended will come into even our lives and have encounters with us. What's difficult to me about Jesus' meeting with Saul is the violence of it. We'll see in some of the paintings that have depicted this, as when we hit the art pieces, that the violence of the voice coming, the light, first the light shining, right? And it does say in the scriptures that Paul fell to the ground. For most artists, they believe that he didn't just like walk and fall, but that he was on a horse. So poor guy tumbled off the horse, sometimes trying to avoid the horse, right? So there's all that involved. And he falls to the ground. He hears this about being persecuted, but then he loses his sight. And to me, that is an amazingly violent way to experience God. Yeah? What is the purpose of that? Why did that have to happen? Well, I'll give you chances to answer some of these questions, but I want to just leave it, because I don't know about you, but when I hear that voice, I really want everything to remain intact. I'm okay, Jesus, the voice is enough. I don't need you to go messing with me. Just give me a voice and I'll go the right way, right? Amen? But for Saul, his name gets changed later on, by the way. He's Saul in the beginning here and eventually becomes Paul. There doesn't seem to be a kind of relationship. We tend to think it's because he was baptized and everything, but it just changes. Anyhow, for Saul, he loses his sight. Now, what this does to someone who's an oppressor is what I'm interested in knowing, right? So when we hit the part where we're going to be talking about invitation to deep change, I want you to think about that. Also at this meeting are the words, right? So there's a couple things that happen. First, Jesus says, Saul, Saul. Right? And then at the second meeting, what does he do? He says Ananias' name too. He says Ananias. So there's something about being known by God by name. My suggestion is when he says your name, you listen. In fact, Ananias has the response that every faithful person can have at the tip of their tongue. Linda. And her response is, here I am, right? It's the response that had been said over the centuries. When Samuel was being called by God, Samuel, Samuel, over and over again in the temple, Eli told him, answer, here I am, Lord. Yeah? So then the words that come out of Jesus' mouth is, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Now this is, I'll remind you, the risen and ascended Jesus. Was he on the earth when Stephen was stoned?
No, he's not.
He's ascended into heaven. And so when he says, why are you persecuting me? There's a couple things going on here. Number one, we understand something about the risen Jesus, in fact, the whole Trinity in that line. We understand something about suffering, persecution, and the role that God plays in that line. We understand that there is no persecuting, oppressing, or causing suffering to another human being that does not persecute, oppress, and suffer, and make suffer Jesus. Why do you persecute me? And then the words that come to Jesus, that come to Ananias. I love this. I love this. There's this back and forth that happens, right? So we have where's that? There we go. We have when Ananias finds out it's Jesus, he says, "Go to the street called Straight." And I'm just grateful for the real good directions here, right? I mean, thank God Jesus understands that you need to spell it out. Go to the road called Straight. There's a guy who's going to be there. He's from Tarsus. His name is Saul. And he's going to be praying, and he's already expecting you. Yeah? And then Ananias gets to respond back. Now that's good news for us post-resurrection, post-ascension Christians, right? Because I guarantee that when God comes to me and tells me something, my usual response to God is like, really? Are you sure? Can we talk about this a little? And so when we do that, it's a faithful response. It's a good response. And so Ananias says, you know what? Jesus, I heard about this guy, and he's sort of out to get us. But then the Lord says to him, things that no one else knows. Paul doesn't know this. He says, go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before Gentiles. This is a Jew, a good Jew, a Jew that doesn't tolerate anti-Jew stuff. He is very Jewish, and he's not going to go to Gentiles. And yet God has chosen him to go to the Gentiles and kings and before the people of Israel. That's like everybody. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. So, if you're Paul or Saul, if you're Saul, it's a good thing that you don't find this out the day that you're baptized. It really is. And it took Ananias to hear that. And what a gift when we have people in our lives who can discern things for us and tell us it ever so slowly. So Ananias actually finds out more than Saul will, and Saul will find it out through his lifetime. Okay, all right, so Jesus in this case indeed initiates the meeting and initiates the meeting with two people. Let's talk about the invitation to deep change. Are there any questions about the initiation of the meeting? Yeah, John.
Well, it's interesting, the first one, everybody heard him speaking. Because in the second one, I guess just Ananias heard him speak.
Right. It was definitely just to Ananias. In the first one, it says that the men that were with him heard the voice, but they couldn't see anyone. It's interesting. I have as an epilogue Paul retelling his own conversion story, and he does it twice in the book of Acts. He does it once in Galatians, and he actually does it slightly in 1 Corinthians. But when he retells the story in the book of Acts, he said the guys saw the light, but they didn't hear the voice. So it's kind of funny. You don't really remember it when, I guess you go blind. You're forgiven for not remembering exact details. But indeed, the voice was heard by more than Saul. And yeah, as far as we know, it was only Ananias in that one. Yes?
So was Jesus being retaliatory towards Saul because, he could have picked anybody to spread the word. Did he pick Saul because Saul had already hurt people? And then he was going to make him suffer for the rest of his life?
Right. Yeah. Good question. And then the whole blindness thing on top of it, it's like, look what I can do to you. Right. Great question. Yeah. Why Saul? Yeah. It's funny, when I found out I was going to do this, Father Bill said, you need a title. And I was like, oh my gosh, here's your title. Meeting Jesus, a cataclysmic transformation. And he's like, well, what's your title? I was like, what? You don't like that title? So then I was like, all right, fine. Meeting Jesus. Ain't nothing stay the same, right? I think that the violence of somebody who is deeply violent, there's a purpose to it. And that sort of brings me into the idea of the invitation to deep change, right? So you meet Jesus, you're going to get changed. There's no subtleties here, right? None. This isn't like, this isn't like something that slowly and gradually happens. This is extreme. Why do you think there is so much drama in this? Paul was drama, okay.
And he's cruel, but he thought he was living in his own righteousness.
Beautifully said, Pat. Yeah, he was cruel. However, he thought he was being righteous in his cruelty. I think that is when we're most cruel, when we're most self-righteous. Yeah? At least I find that I am most dangerous when I'm most self-righteous. Other reasons why.
How else would you get Paul's attention?
Okay, so Paul is on a murderous rampage. How do you get the attention of a murderer? Well, you knock him down on the ground and you make him go blind, right? If you can do it. Okay, all right.
He's totally helpless. He can't see, and he's...
All right, now let's talk about that. So Kate said he's totally helpless. He's totally helpless. What do you think about that? Paul is totally helpless. So one of the things that Christians struggle with mightily is coming to terms with the fact that we're totally out of control. None of it is in our control. We are totally helpless. I don't know how you're experiencing that. I don't know if that sounds like good news to you, or if it sounds terrifying, or if it even sounds wrong. But one of the things that we as human beings who have a relationship with the almighty, most powerful God have to figure out is how much of it is God and how much of it is us. How much is God in control and how much are we in control? I think that's one of the greatest struggles of anyone who is involved in any kind of religious life. It is an incredible struggle for Christians because we constantly pray and seek the welfare of a God who is the Lord of the universe. So for Paul to experience something so violent may have actually been what we all experience in our own spiritual lives. That violence of realizing that we are blind, that we have no control, that we desperately are seeking God to take care of us. That this might actually simply be what happens naturally to post-resurrection, post-ascension Christians. I want you to try to think about the most spiritual times in your life, or which may be probably the times that you have struggled the most. Maybe where you felt most empty, where you felt most deeply hurt, where you were most deeply angry. And in those times, what control did you have? Were you able to get a pathway to the place that you wanted to be? Or were you at the mercy of God helping? Yes, Pat?
Seeing that Paul was helpless, going back to verse 5b, and then 6, 7, and 8, he wasn't helpless at that point because he couldn't get up, and he was hearing. But then he was disabled. In that two-part area, help me understand, I'm not quite sure the helplessness, clarifying it, was he just the helplessness after that second part?
So,
Where he was
the help,
blinded and-
so we have a person who it begins by breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, right? And he ends that he can't see anything, so they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. That's an incredibly helpless situation,
Yes,
right?
But
So
before that, he wasn't totally helpless. He was able.
when he was struck down and he heard the voice, yeah, I'm experiencing this as a kind of like an immediate thing. He's down on the ground, he hears the voice, if we're to understand the scriptures and take them literally here. And then he gets up and he opens his eyes and he realizes he can't see a blessed thing.
Okay, so the second part is really the helplessness.
But to continue on that, and my next point is, and then for 3 days he didn't have sight and neither ate nor drank. Now what is that about?
He's in shock.
He's in shock? So you don't eat or drink for 3 days?
It's like fasting.
Morning.
Is it like fasting
It's
or
like
more?
morning. this morning about it.
It's a spiritual practice. When you don't know what's going on and you need to be centered, you fast. You fast. You need clarity. You don't know what's going on. I mean, I want you to think about it. If you walk out to that parking lot and all of a sudden the heavens open up and there's a light shining on you, you fall to the ground, and there's somebody who says something to you, and you get up and now you can't see a blessed thing, this requires radical measure on your part. Yeah? You got to do something about it. And so I think this is the acknowledgement that there was something going on. And even when we finally tell God we're not in control, we have ways to participate with our bodies and our lives and our words and our minds to show God we're not in control, but we're with you. And I really think that that's what the fasting did. It changed Paul. Yes, Stephanie?
There's scripture in Isaiah that talks about a fast that we don't have control over, that God gave us a fast to do. I'm trying to think, is it Isaiah 40? I think that's what it was.
There's a fast that loosens the bonds of
58.
injustice. Is that
Yeah,
what you-
58.
Okay,
Isaiah 58, where it talks about this fast.
great. Thank you. Isaiah 58. Yeah.
So if you're blind, you're not able to see what you're eating, you can't also, it's hard to eat, you have to require other people to help you find food, and find, you just don't, you can't do it yourself if you're totally blind.
So maybe the fasting was sort of brought on from the fact he couldn't see what he was doing.
He was doing, and he
Okay.
was able to help him, he felt he had mercy of somebody else to
Okay.
take care of him.
Yeah, mercy.
Well, these guys were good enough to lead him to Damascus. You'd think they'd want to feed him, you know.
But he lost his
yeah,
appetite.
yeah.
He just completely quit.
So it could have been out of the trauma. Yeah. Fair enough. All right. So now let's switch gears and look at our friend Ananias, because he too encounters Jesus. Let's not downplay the fact that Ananias was just a good God-fearing guy, and Jesus comes to him. And so now, does he undergo any deep change? Does he undergo a conversion of sorts? What do you think? Robert?
He's a disciple,
He's a disciple.
so he's well on the road to the pathway of light and love for Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So he's far along, and I think he sees the assignment, so to speak, as an element of his calling.
Just part of everyday life as a person who believes in Jesus, right? Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Except, you know what? I think even people who believe in Jesus have conversions. Yeah, Amy.
I just keep thinking of the cliche, like he has to put his money where his mouth is, like he has to go do it now, and at great peril, it would seem.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of risk as he perceives it, and so it's not easy.
Well, he's trepidatious because he says that he's heard about this man, Saul. He knows how much evil Saul has done, and he has authority to chief priests to bind all who invoke your name. So the Lord have had to, let's say, explain further the situation to Ananias.
I appreciate your calm, Robert, and if I'm ever in any crisis, you're going to be right there next to me. because for me, I feel sort of what Amy is talking about. And today, for those who were there at the 8:30 a.m. Eucharist, you all know that today's the feast day of Eric Liddell, who that a feast day for a saint means that it's the day that they
Born?
died
Or down?
or were killed. It's the martyrdom day. And so the feast day, for instance, for Martin Luther King is not in January, it's April 4th, the day he was assassinated. Yeah? So the feast day today is for Eric Liddell. He died. What is today? February 22nd, 1945. And very, very quickly, Eric is the guy who was in the movie Chariots of Fire. He was an athlete, a runner, and he loved Jesus, and he refused to play in the Olympics on a Sunday, the 100-meter, which is what he was really good at. And instead, he did the 400-meter because it was on a different day, a Thursday, I don't know. And he ended up winning the gold in that. He would have never won the gold in that unless he had his convictions and he kept it. So that's Chariots of Fire. In April, there's another movie coming out about Eric, who is considered the greatest Scots athlete by Scottish people. Anybody Scottish? Okay. After he did that, he returned to China where he was born, where his parents were missionaries, and he himself got ordained and became a missionary there. And the movie that's coming out in April is called On the Wings of Eagles, starring the ultra fabulous Joe Fiennes. So I can't wait to see it. And anyhow, when dear Eric was in China, it was 1941, and the British government said that everybody needs to leave. It's becoming very dangerous. The Japanese were invading China. And Eric sent his family, his 2 kids, and his wife, who was pregnant with a 3rd, back home. And he heard the voice of the Lord saying to him, stay in China. He never got to meet his 3rd daughter. He was in China. While he was in China taking care of the poor, he was caught and put in an internment camp in which there were horrible conditions, as you well know. There were, 23 toilets for 1,800 people. They didn't have enough food for everybody. People would starve. They created little cliques. Missionaries and priests created little cliques. And Eric would go around saying, no, you have to share those eggs with the children. 5 months before the Allies came to free everyone, he died of an inoperable brain tumor. He listened to the Lord. There's a lot of danger in listening to Jesus. So you know, the deep change that Ananias goes through is that he has that natural fear that we completely understand when someone is trying to get us, right? And when somebody has the power to get us, they have the power to kill us. And meeting Jesus can so cataclysmically transform you that you're willing to go anyway. Finally, I think one of the worst things about meeting Jesus is, again, when I am at my worst. When I meet Jesus and I'm at my worst, Jesus brings and calls out the best in me. And it's costly. It's very costly. It can cost me my life. It certainly costs me my pride. It costs me a way of being that I'm very comfortable with. One that makes me feel important, and one that I have learned and felt very comfortable with my own skin. When you meet Jesus, it costs you, because ain't nothing going to stay the same. Yeah? I saw Garland, so she's ready to eat. Let me just really quickly go through my boundaries that are crossed, and then we'll grab some food, and then I have some art I'd like to show you too. So I'm just going to stick that in there too. So what are some of the boundaries that are crossed? I think probably the biggest one for me is to know that Jesus isn't going to stay up there, that he's going to come down here and mess with us. Like, I don't know about you, but that's a huge boundary. I was okay with him being up there and me being down here, and I'll figure stuff out down here, Jesus. And, every once in a while, if you can throw me a word, I got it, but I got this down here. There is none of that. That barrier between heaven and earth has been broken. And so Jesus will come down. Jesus will come down. Another boundary that is crossed is that whole thing of hatred turning into love. That is annoying. So Paul, who was a really good hater, he was really good at it. He even figured out how to get letters so that he could hate other people, right? He had to flip that all around and become lovers of the people that he hated. So that boundary is something that Jesus constantly crosses. The one that I find very, very interesting and intriguing is the boundary of the oppressor becoming the oppressed. Those words that Jesus said, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? I think are fascinating to me. If you are an oppressed person, if you experience oppression or persecution, one of the most powerful things that you can do is to display your vulnerability to the oppressor, which is astonishing. It's the last thing you think you should be doing. But doing such, apparently, has more power over the oppressor than anything else that can be said or done. I remember a story of, they were marching in South Africa against apartheid, right? It was back when they had apartheid. And they were marching, and there's Desmond Tutu marching along in Johannesburg, marching. And the cops, the police, the South African police were lined up on the way. And it was packed. There were so many people. And there was a black man who was close to the edge of the street. And, of course, with the police lined there, he happened to just kind of bump into one of the policemen. Because it was packed. There just wasn't any room. Immediately, the policeman took out his baton, hit the guy, brought him down, and started to pummel him. Tutu, who was there, went over, threw his body on the person who was getting beaten, looked up straight in the eyes of the man with the baton and said, "He's a human being." When you are oppressed, your vulnerability is power. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Yeah. Other boundaries that are crossed, Jew and Gentile. There's a Jew who's now going to be going to the Gentiles, and we know how successful that was. And finally, it's amazing to me to know that we have a God who is not afraid and indeed desires to intervene into human history. And that is good news for all of us, yeah. Okay, really quickly, since Carolyn left, here we go, some art. This is really hard for me. I Googled it all, right? Because I'm not Father Bill Danaher. But I was fascinated by the art that you can find. This is by a guy named Murillo. It's La Conversion de San Pablo, Conversion of St. Paul. And here you have, notice the horses. You have the blessed horse who's been knocked down too. Here is Paul. He's reaching out. Here's that great light. And if you get close, you can see he kind of looks a little blind. It's really cool. It's clearly that he's not looking at the light itself. And there's Jesus with a cross, and he's got the stigmata, the marks. And it actually says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" in whatever language this is, right? But I thought that was kind of neat. So that's that one. Caravaggio really was taken by this, and he did two different paintings. This one is called The Conversion of St. Paul. Again, you see the horse, and there's just, there seems to be just a lot of chaos in this. And I was really struck by that. I was also struck by the fact that Paul lost his clothing. I'm not really sure what happened there. But the covering of his eyes. And you get that sense of just how intense this experience must have been. In another one, this one, he is on the ground, and it looks like his horse is going to trample him too. And so the danger, I think, was just built up to me with the horse's hoof kind of showing here and him looking out. And he can't tell which way is up. He can't figure out what's going on. This I'll leave up for during dinner because I don't even know where it's from. I couldn't figure it out, but I thought it was gorgeous. And it shows the story of Paul, starting with the stoning of Stephen, all the way to, I think this is Acts 19 or 18 or 19, where he preaches the gospel up in Athens. And so you can see that there's him stoning Stephen, and then here is Jesus confronting Saul. And then here's Ananias baptizing and going on. This is amazing. I mean, it's an incredible sculpture. It's in Damascus, which is in Syria. I thought that was so cool. And apparently in this area there's a mosque too, so it's kind of like Jerusalem. There's a whole lot of religion going on in one place. And here, everybody's falling. There's the horse, and Saul is completely horizontal on the horse. That can't be good, right? And then finally, by a modern print painter, I'm not going to say his name right, it's Hei Chi, I think. I think he lives in Wisconsin, so, and he does some beautiful renditions. You can Google him and see some of his renditions of the stories of the Old Testament and New Testament. And here he has the calling of St. Paul, and what struck me about this was the fact that you had the Spirit of fire coming and speaking to Paul. Changing his life forever and ever. Yes, Michelle.
I think that he chose Saul because Saul was such a bad dude. But the people in general knew how bad Saul was, and so, Jesus is like, well, if I convert this guy, the rest of them won't convert.
It was, okay, great. It didn't quite work out. There were people who tried to actually kill Paul several times too. So he didn't get very far with that. Okay, we're gonna have a cake.
If you go to St. Paul's Chapel, there's a mosaic on the floor of that scene, huge. Right?
Of the conversion?
Yes, right in front by the altar.
Is it like something like this, or?
Yeah, well, there's a horse, and it's very dark. The mosaic's done in very dark tones, so there's a horse and then Paul's on the ground. But, next time you go to
So
church,
in
right
St.
on the
Paul
floor.
Chapel, on the ground, apparently there's a great mosaic.
A mosaic.
Let's go ahead and say a prayer, and then we'll have some dinner, yeah? The Lord be with you.